Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 24. I'm here with one of my very favorite people and one of my best friends in the world, Jimbo Balaam. Jimbo is an entrepreneur, content creator, multipreneur really. And I thought today would be an awesome opportunity for us to talk to somebody that's gone through this entrepreneurial journey. He's still a young guy, like 15 years younger than me. And so, but he's already done quite a bit of stuff at least. How old are you?
I'm joking. I'm 34.
All right. So you're 16 years younger than me, but Jimbo's gone through this whole process. So whether you're an employee, an entrepreneur, or a budding entrepreneur, like this is something you want to try as you're getting a little bit later in life, then kind of follow this journey and we'll learn some stuff from him. So thanks, man. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah. See you later. Just kidding. It sounded like an outro to me.
Sounded like an outro. I should mention that Jimbo and I have known each other for like a decade, and we've probably done 15 or 16 podcast episodes together on his podcast and my podcast. So this will be a very familiar, sarcasm-laden episode, I'm sure. So yeah, why don't you stick around for a little bit anyway?
Yeah. No, super happy to be here.
So,
super happy for you.
Walk through your kind of. So what I was thinking is that we can go ahead and tell people kind of what your entrepreneurial journey has been, basically, and then we can go into some stuff about like if you want to start this journey on your own, here's where you might start. There's some options, and kind of go through all that. So I'll just let you ramble and talk for a while. Give me your journey from starting your detailing business, content creation, Airbnb, and all that stuff.
Sure. And cut me off wherever I could talk forever. So in sixth grade, I got a detention.
We got time. It's sixth grade. Yeah, sixth grade. Nice.
So if I go on too much, just cut me off and interrupt wherever you see fit. But my journey into entrepreneurship, as I kind of reflect back on it all these years later, I realized that I was, and seeing kind of my kids grow up and then my nieces and nephews grow up, I really do believe that I was born with the entrepreneurial gene. Because for as far back as I remember, I always wanted to own my own business. Now, for the longest time, I thought I wanted to own my own business because my dad owned his own business, and I saw what that afforded him, not necessarily in tangible things, but in flexibility as far as time is concerned, flexibility as far as doing what he wanted to do, what he wanted to wear, and how he wanted to kind of operate his life. Now we would call that kind of a lifestyle business, but back in the 90s, there was if that was a term in the 90s, I wasn't familiar with it because I was only, 5 years old or 6 years old, or whenever you start remembering those first memories. But for as long as I've been alive, my dad has owned his own business. And so that was the closest example to me. And so, going through high school and starting to come of age where you got to get a job, I knew that I had to get a job, but in the back of my head, I always wanted to run my own business. And I was a really, really bad student from pretty much like 7th, 8th grade through high school. I just kind of coasted by. I wasn't into drugs. I didn't get into anything. But my biggest problem was that none of the teachers could tell me how what they were trying to teach me in class was applicable to the real world, how I would need it.
Yeah, I don't think they can do that still. I don't think
they still can't do that. So, that was always my question growing up of like, okay, this is cool, but how does it apply to real life? Right? Because at home, I'm seeing my dad, do the books for his business and counting the money and doing accounting and taxes and budgeting and trying to scale. And, and my dad just owned a t-shirt and candy shop, and it started with just t-shirts, and then it went into t-shirts and candy. So I was going down to, the candy wholesalers and stocking and kind of learning that game and customer service, and, worked at the restaurant, worked at the shop, we called it, all the time, because the shop also doubled as my babysitter. because that's where I would go after school, because that's where my dad was, and my mom most of the time. And so I didn't go home after school. I went to the shop, because it was a short distance from where the bus dropped me off. And I was too young to be at home. So I went to the shop till 6 or 7, and kind of sat, so that was my earliest memories of doing that. And even one time I remember I was learning as a customer walks in, you got to approach them and talk to them. And there was like a little script that they would say of like, hey, welcome in. Is there anything I can help you with? Anything I can help you find? And that was kind of the script that my dad would say. And so I was learning this script. And I remember one time I said, hey, is there anything I can help you find? Anything I can help you buy? And I messed up. Like that was a little aggressive, but I remember that customer having like, oh, wow, like that was up front. Like, yeah, is there anything you can help me buy? What do I need to buy? And so that was one of my earliest memories from working at the shop. But he made candy and fudge and T-shirts, and he screen printed his own T-shirts, and then it transitioned into a mail center, which he still owns to this day. And so I know way more about shipping and notaries.
Did they take?
Mm-hmm.
Did they take the time? Like, were they deliberate about teaching you things like how to do the books and how to sell and all that? So this is just you observing dad and mom kind of working in the shop. Okay.
Yep. There was that, and that's one thing that I get frustrated at now, but I'm very diligent to try to do it with my kids now, is there was, a lot of the teaching was, oh, you'll figure it out, or I don't know, find a way. And it frustrates me now, because it's like, man, it didn't have to be that hard. Like, figuring it out is really hard. But if you could have a mentor or someone telling you, hey, this is how I've done it in the past, or this is why I do it this way, or this is the system that I've developed, and it's maybe not perfect, maybe not the only way, but this is, someone teaching you that or doing that. And I think that's why this podcast could be so valuable to people too, is because and just technology in general, I guess, because when you can hear other people that have done it or how they're doing it, call it a mentor for sure, right? That you could just grow leaps and bounds faster that way. And how I grew up was like, figure it out. It's like, I want a car, figure it out. It's like, ouch, that hurts.
Right. One of my buddies who was actually a guest on the podcast, Mike Pashota, he does real estate development. His mom does day trading. So he's got this 12-year-old. He's got a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. His 12-year-old son, they take both of these kids to real estate closings, and they have them sit on conference calls with the loan officers. And, this kid is actually doing day trading now. He has a certain budget that he got to start with.
Wow.
And he continues to build that. So like, they're taking steps to deliberately teach these kids. And the irony is that these kids are what they call unschooled, right? Like that's a phrase that's a little bit different than homeschooling. And so taking that chance to teach, if you're an entrepreneur or if you're, with just basic life skills, it's always good to teach your kids that stuff.
One of my favorite life skills, I actually learned it. My first job was in and out. And I think if I was growing up in this era, I don't think I would have ever had a normal job, but I am grateful for the jobs that I had. I never lasted very long at any job. I think the longest I lasted was 2 years, because I had this, and this is where the entrepreneurial part of me really started to come out, was I would sit at those jobs and I would realize everything they were doing wrong or everything they could do better.
Right.
And then that would frustrate me, and then that would make me bad at my job, because I'm like, well, why do you do it that way? That's so dumb. Like, well, this is how we've always done it. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't work. And they're like, what do you mean it doesn't work? I'm the manager here, and it's like, okay, well, I just started, but like, that's all you want me to do? Like, it doesn't work. And so I would, I also have a really good work ethic, which I inherited from both my parents, who grew up in the grocery business. So I had this weird, thing going where I had like an extremely good work ethic, but then thought everyone was doing stuff wrong. So it did not mix for a good employee mindset. But one of my favorite life skills that I'm absolutely going to teach my kids, and maybe it's one of those things that it's like, maybe it's the equivalent to learning cursive nowadays, but like making change for someone is a skill that I learned at In-N-Out. And I'm a big, if people haven't, caught on by now with just us, jamming back and forth, like I'm a big prankster. I love razzing people. Like I love messing with people. I love that. And one of the best ways to mess with people is to make them give you change when they've already hit like a mountain tendered, right? So give them a penny after they've already like popped open the drawer, or like give them a dime or 50 cents or 52 cents or something like that, right? And just watch them squirm and call managers, or give them $1, right? Because you want a 10 back and not like $9 and something cents, or what, you want $10.15 back instead of $9 and whatever cents back, right? And so that's a skill, a life skill. I think that's super important.
Yeah, that's funny to be able to do that to, fast food workers now, because the freaking computer does it all for them, right? I mean, that's assuming that people are still paying with cash, but like that, their brain just like, they look like they're having a stroke when you do that. Like they don't really know what to do. So,
well, and their excuse is that, if they can't give you back different change than what they entered, because it'll throw their till off, and it's like,
doesn't work that way. That's not how math works. But okay.
Your math is not mathing, right? And so, but yeah, so I remember in high school, like the only classes that I did good in was like the entrepreneurial elective classes where we'd like build our own businesses. And, but still this is like early 2000s. So the path that was right in front of me, was you go to college, because I wasn't a drug addict. I didn't go to a continuation school. I wasn't a bad kid. I did two things. I went to the gym and I went to work. And the only reason why I didn't do homework and I didn't do good on tests was because I went to work right after school. In fact, I missed school a lot of times because my shift started at 2:30, but school got out at 2:20 and I worked 30 minutes away. So again, my math wasn't mathing. And so there was no way to actually finish school and then make it to work on time. So it was a very easy decision for me of, 3 days out of every week, I was not going to go to school because I had to get to work, because I had bills and my insurance and I like to do stuff. And so, but the traditional path was still very much important that was what everyone did. You go to high school and then you go to college and then you get a good job and blah, blah, blah. And so I tried that path. And that path was just clearly not for me. But that was a very uncool, a very difficult, conversation to have with my parents of like, hey, I'm not going to college. It's not for me, And I have an older sister.
You're like a loser, but you don't have a good excuse like drugs.
Yeah, exactly. So you're in this weird thing. Like, well, what are you going to do? Like, you're not in rehab, like you're a normal, like, I'm not straight edge, but I was like as close to straight edge as you could be without being straight edge, just because I didn't like it. I'm like, no, I got goals and I got things I want to accomplish. And one day I'm going to own my own business. And they're like, well, go to school until you do that. I'm like, no, I can't. Like, I'm literally allergic to sitting in a classroom. I just cannot do it. I don't know what it is. I just cannot do it. And so, around this time, I think I was going to community college. It's not like I was an all-star student and went to some university or something. I was at a community college. And by that time I had left In-N-Out. I worked at a surf shop, worked my way basically up to assistant store manager at a surf shop, and got fired for telling them, their ways were inefficient. And then, went to a restaurant, because I'm like, I can go to school during the day and then work at a restaurant at night, especially on weekend nights. That's where the money is. So I started working at a restaurant as a busboy, food runner. And then at the same time, had gotten a new car after someone hit me in a car accident and totaled my car. So I got a new car, and that car had a car payment. And I had this weird thought that had happened many years before in middle school. Driving to school, my dad would take me to school some days, and I remember driving to school, looking out the window and looking at all these cars. So like my whole life, it was like I wanted to own my own business, and then I was also fascinated with cars, not necessarily mechanically, because no one in my family that I know is mechanical at all, but it was just something about cars that I liked. And again, reflecting back on it now, I realize one thing that I do often that I don't realize, I kind of do it subconsciously, and maybe a lot of people do it, I don't know, is I pay attention to other things around me, and I kind of try to analyze them, right? And so, again, that's putting words to something that I naturally do that I didn't know that I naturally did. But in middle school, when my dad would take me to school, I would look and pay attention to all these cars that were driving down the same road. And I started to like see a weird thing happening of like, man, you could have a really high-end car that's dirty and it looks like a piece of crap, but you can have an old car.
And we should point out that you grew up in Southern California. So there's the car culture in Southern California. If you did not grow up there, it's literally just filled with cool cars when you drive around. So
yeah, fair point.
And preface that, but yeah, you say you have a new car and if it's dirty, so
yeah. And I'm not driving down a 2-lane road to school either. This is a 3-lane each direction highway to my school. So there's tons of people, tons of cars. And so, I'm getting all this data into my brain, on this 15-20 minute ride to school every day. And I realized that like a fancy car, quote unquote fancy, that's dirty looks worse than a quote unquote junker that's clean, right? And I thought, man, isn't that interesting? Like that kind of levels the playing field, right? Because not everyone can afford a nice car. Not everyone can afford a luxury car, but everyone could keep a car clean with just a little bit of effort, right? So that was the thought I had in middle school. Fast forward to I get this new car new to me car. I was 5 years old at the time with a car payment, and that thought comes back of like, it was just a Toyota 4Runner. It wasn't a crazy car at all, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep this car clean forever. This car is never going to see dirt, right? Because I always wanted a really fancy high-end car, but I could never afford it. I grew up very middle class. Now, if you look up the town of Seal Beach, it's wealth has moved in. But when I grew up there, it was very middle class, upper middle class, but still definitely middle class, right? We drove my first car was a 1994 Volvo for $5,000, right? But it got me to A to B. So
nice.
It was probably worth $2,500. We probably overpaid for it. Anyway, so I started washing my car with a buddy that I met from the surf shop. And we just started washing our car for fun because I was like, well, I'd rather do it. There's like pride of ownership, right? And then working at the restaurant, I was kind of getting burnt out on that, really burnt out on going to school. I knew it wasn't for me before I even signed up. And then my parents made me pay for my own schooling, which was even more of a reason not to go. Because I'm like, man, I'm paying for classes, I'm paying for books. It's pretty much taking up my whole paycheck. Like, this is so dumb. Like, and I don't even like it. And now I don't even want to go. Like, this is really dumb, And so I started researching.
Yeah, that's crazy because it's like, you really have to do this. You really have to, this is something I really want you to do. And oh, by the way, I know you don't want to do it and you have to pay for it. So yeah, good luck.
But my older sister had gone to, UC Santa Barbara, was going for her master's degree, was considering her doctorate degree, like a book smart girl, corporate America. Like, she had a corporate job with full benefits and did the route, and then here I am like 6.5 years younger, kind of like the loser. Not the loser. My parents never called me a loser, but, I was like going to community college barely, talking about how one day I'm going to own my own business, So I was just washing my car with my buddy and just kind of fed up with school and kind of fed up with working at this restaurant because I just worked there over a year. And that was about my cutoff at a job was about a year before I moved on to something else. And I just had this thought one day of like, I wonder if like washing other people's cars are a thing, So then I bounced that idea off my dad and my mom. Like, do you think people like go wash cars, like, for other people? And I get the same response, like, go figure it out. And I'm like, okay. And lucky for me, by this time it's 2007, 2008. We're on the dawn of the internet. I just joined YouTube back in October of 2006 when I graduated high school. And so I did what we did early internet days, and I went to YouTube, and I'm like, it was literally, I wish I could see my history from back then, but like, just started doing research and started reading forums and Autopia and AutoGeek forums and and all that. And it kind of opened my world to like, whoa, this car wash detailing thing like is a thing, you know? And then things started to progress really quickly because I was like, this is it. Like, this is my business. I'm going to do this. And so within a matter of weeks, I was researching, I figured I would go mobile because I figured out mobile detailing was a thing. And I didn't have any cash to start a shop. I was 19. I was still hanging on to school, working at a restaurant, and this was going to be like my side hustle. And so I started thinking about, okay, who are the people? Like I knew nothing about car detailing, literally nothing, other than I wash my car with Dawn dish soap. I buy this like Black Magic wheel cleaner, and I really like this Armor All tire shine. Like beyond that, I wash my own car, and that's about it, right? And so I started.
Yeah, because back in 2007, I mean, it was just still burgeoning basically as an industry. It's not like, and if you guys are not familiar with the detailing industry, over the last probably maybe 7 to 10 years, it's really become like an actual industry. And, back in the day, it was more grab a bucket, grab a sponge, and now you've got a business kind of thing.
And there were some like professional guys, but it was kind of like the paintless dent repair industry where no one really talked about it. No one really shared trade secrets. And so there was very limited info. And so I just started digging all the info I could, and so I started to think, well, I did like my family's car to kind of be like, hey, is this like, would you pay for this? Like, how much is this worth? And did my older sister's car because she had a stable job and some disposable income and, worked all week. And so didn't want to have to clean her own car. So I started doing that. And then I was like, I'm going to ask the managers at the restaurant that I work at if any of them want their car detailed. Like, I'm going to just start doing that, and I'll detail it out of my dad's garage, and the restaurant's close. It's in the same town. I could ride my bike, go pick up their car, bring it back to my dad's house, detail it, bring it back, and they'll still be at work because they're managers. They work 12 hours a day, so I'll have all day to do it, And so I got one of the managers, detailed her car, and then after I did that, I'm like, man, this manager paid me, I think she paid me like $120. And I'm like, I made $120, went to class that day, did it after class, and then worked at the restaurant that night. And I was like, dang, like out of all the things I did today, what I really liked was detailing that car because I'm out in the sun. I like being outside, at the restaurant I'm inside, at school I'm inside, the restaurant I'm starting to get over. But I make good money, but I made more money detailing this car. It like, my brain really started to go. So I started going on Craigslist and researching mobile detailing setups. And after looking at a bunch and kind of honing in what I wanted and where I would be storing the trailer and all those factors, I bought a trailer off Craigslist. I borrowed the money from my dad, bought a 10-foot enclosed trailer. I'd never towed a trailer in my whole entire life. Didn't even know there was a whole skill set to towing a trailer. Had no clue. My truck, I ended up getting a new car, had a truck, didn't even know what a receiver hitch was or, a 2-inch ball or a 1 3/8 ball or 1.5-inch ball. Like I knew none of it. Right. And
yeah, speaking of like basic skill sets, right?
I mean, I literally didn't know. Luckily, my truck had in the bumper a spot for a tow hitch or for a ball. Because my truck didn't even have a receiver hitch. It didn't have a receiver, whatever you call it, on it. And so I had to get that installed, the drop hitch, it's like all these things that I never even thought about, right? Like, where do you plug in the lights? Like all these things. Anyway, so I learned all that, off YouTube because I had no idea, and that doesn't even get to, learning how to back up a trailer. And so that was a fun experience. There was a couple times I did have to unhook and move and then rehook up. But I'm,
with a 10. I will say, even though it's a 10-foot trailer, those single axle trailers are far more difficult to back up. Like that's how I teach people. You can take a little tiny. I taught my girls how to back a trailer by putting a little single axle behind the lawnmower. Because they're so much more finicky than I've got a 25-foot trailer now and I can back that through a drive-through.
Mm-hmm.
But the little single axles are actually harder, I think. But
yeah, I mean, either way, it. You know what's so funny is the confidence that comes from knowing how to back up a trailer. Like, look at what you just said. I could, put it through a drive-through. And I feel the same way of like, if you know how to back up a trailer, it's like, man, get out. Like, if you see someone doing it, backing a boat down a launch ramp or trying to back up a trailer and they're just all over the place, it's like, I have done that a few times. Like, can you just get out and I'll do it? Be way easier if I just
because
took it
everybody is watching you. That's the worst. Like, I mean, we used to go boating. I grew up in Oklahoma, and there was a time when this dude who was like this big macho dude, totally cocky, could not get the trailer backed up. And this girl I was with, kind of a friend of my girlfriend at that time, she was like, dude, get out of the truck. You're holding everybody up. She jumped in his pickup, one shot, put the boat in the water, and like, people were just like that. I felt bad for the guy, but he didn't know what he was doing. He needed to get out of the seat, let somebody else do it. But
totally. And that was me when I first got the trailer, because my wife, now girlfriend at the time, her whole family grew up boating. Her dad's like a manly man, and I was kind of coming in as like this girl man, and then I just bought this trailer, and like the first question he asked is like, do you know how to back it up? And I'm like, yeah, dude, you just back it up. He's like, no. Like, there's a whole skill set to it. And so that was fun. Happy to report I could still back up a trailer.
Yeah, you got to put your right arm has to go over the passenger seat. Like, there's this whole like position you have to be in. Like, if some, all of that stuff. So it's funny because it's definitely a skill set you have to have.
But I'll tell you, if you get yourself with a trailer in a predicament where you don't think you can get yourself out of it, and then you do, that feels good. Like, yeah, I'm good. I know how to do it. That happened one time when I was moving. I had like this 15-foot trailer, and I pulled in. We had moved into an apartment complex, and I pulled in. I wasn't familiar with it, and I pulled into the carports, and I thought there was an exit on the other side, and there wasn't. And I got real stuck. Pretty much jackknifed myself, but pulled out of it, and I was like, I could tow a trailer anywhere, man. Come on, come at me. 3 minutes before I was about to cry.
No.
So, then I did mobile detailing for a long time and started with just friends and family, bought that trailer, had some, 8.5 by 11 printouts of what I did, because this is 2008. And just kind of hit the ground running, joined a BNI group, or Business Networking International group, which really helped in the beginning to get some additional clients of people that I didn't know. Some reoccurring clients. Ended up getting a couple office buildings through my mom's friends that worked at these local office buildings. And even though the economy was bad in 2008, what I found was that a lot of these mobile detailers, especially around me, for these fleet accounts, I call them, would stop showing up. And so that was the white space that I found, or the blue ocean, of like, man, these guys show up for a couple months. The employees get used to someone coming every Tuesday to get their car cleaned, and then they stop showing up. Right. And so I would just show up every Tuesday, and people would say things like, wow, you actually showed up. And that blew my mind of like, well, yeah, I said that I was going to be here. Like,
I had a marketing professor in college that basically said, hey, in order to be successful in life and in business especially, you don't have to be like tremendously better. Like, you don't have to be 10 steps ahead of that. You just have to be like this much better, which is like, if you're holding your fingers up, it's like an inch, right? Like, you only have to be a little bit better. And what's crazy is that just you showing up was being better, which makes no sense to me whatsoever, because if you say you're going to do something, go do it, right?
I mean, that's what was so obvious to me. And it like, I'll never forget that, of like multiple times, whether it was a fleet account or a private account, it was like, oh my gosh, you showed up. It's like, well, yeah, I didn't. And at first, I'm very naive. I'm 19. This is my first business. It's, I don't know anything. I'm green to everything. And so it caught me off guard of like, well, did we not have an appointment today? Like, I literally remember saying that back to people, like, did I get it wrong? And they're like, no, it just, the other 3 guys didn't show up. And then I remember thinking that of like, wait, all the news and everyone is talking about how we're in this really bad recession, but I'm killing it. Like, I paid off the trailer within a month. Like, I'm doing great. Where's this recession at? All I'm hearing is the guy didn't show up, and, he showed up, but he took too long. And, it was like, it seemed like at that time I couldn't go anywhere without picking up clients. And I found out one really good strategy. So I got some vinyl stickers on the side of the trailer, that just had my number and Jimbo's Auto Detailing. And I would go to Starbucks every morning, and I would get a coffee every morning, and I would just do it because I wanted coffee. But then I started to get calls. Hey, I saw your trailer in the parking lot at Starbucks. Hey, it started to happen like all the time. And so I started to go,
Right.
like, I would hang out for a little bit longer, or I'd like set up my day and return phone calls in the parking lot at Starbucks with my trailer attached, and I got a lot of business from doing that, and the trailer just being there, and then making sure my truck and trailer were always dialed in. Like, and that's where I came up with this idea of like the ghetto car wash. And the ghetto car wash to me is all you do is you clean the rims and you dress the tires, and that's it. You don't wipe the paint down, you don't clean the windows, you don't do any of that. You just do rims and tires, because for the most part, like, unless your car, where I live, it mainly gets dusty, not really dirty, right? So for the most part,
Yeah.
it looks like your car's really clean if you just clean the rims and dress the tires, right? But I realized if I do that, if I do that, I look presentable. My trailer was always clean outside and inside, because when it's wide open and I'm doing a car, people driving by look inside the trailer. So if it's clean and organized, that's a representation of the work that I can perform. And so, I did that until 2012. I had my first daughter. And then right around 2013, I started to get really burnt out, because where I live is super expensive. And so I was doing everything that I could, all the work I could. And so I was doing, a normal day. Like, if I considered it a good day, it would be 10 to 12 cars a day by myself. And I tried to hire people, and it was not working. So that was a lot of cars every day, 5 days a week, sometimes 6. But honestly, by Friday, if you've done 10 to 12 cars a day, you're ready for that weekend. And so by 2013, I was getting really tired of it, really burnt out on it, of doing that high volume of cars for so long. And so I needed something else. So I thought I just needed to occupy my mind more, because detailing becomes really monotonous, because you're basically doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so I started to get really bored with it. And so right about that time, I finally got an iPhone, started listening to audiobooks and podcasts more specifically, and then really had this thought too of like, I need to grow. There was big issues with detailing. If I'm not working, I'm not making any money. If it's raining, I'm not making any money. If if it's gonna rain, I'm not making any money. Did I already say if I get sick? If I get sick, I don't make money, and I'm capped out.
So that's an excellent.
Yeah, and I'm also capped in how much I can earn, because you can only like charge so much in certain markets, And so I got more efficient, because I figured, there's 2 ways to make more money. You could raise your price, or you can get more efficient and do the same amount of work in half the time. And so that's where an efficiency play came in for me, and that worked well. But I also needed to have a bigger market. I'm like, I am dealing with a hyper local market here in Orange County, California. I need a bigger market. And at the time I was listening to a podcast, and I was like, man, I wonder if I should start a podcast, And so I was talking to this other guy, and I'm like, man, I want to start a podcast.
This was way back when there were no podcasts. I mean, like, it's not like now where like, dude, I have 2 podcasts. Everybody I know has a podcast. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's a great new medium, for people to find different stuff that they want. But like, when you're talking 2013, 2014, and 15, I mean, this was like early, in terms of podcasting, right?
And I thought I was late. So I was listening to a lot of entrepreneurial marketing podcasts at the time, and I thought I was late. And I was talking to a guy, and I'm like, this is August of 2014. And I'm talking to a guy, And I'm like, man, I think I want to start a podcast because all the factors that I just mentioned, but I don't have a big business. We're talking about, I'm doing, just under 6 figures a year, have built up a pretty good one-man band detailing business, but it's literally killing me. Like I'm just smoked, and I have no time freedom, no flexibility, no nothing. Right. And so I'm like, I think I want to start a podcast. And he's like, you're an idiot. And I'm like, what? And he's like, why don't you start a podcast about detailing? And I'm like, dude, there's got to be someone. Like, I'm so late to this party. I'm trying to figure out my niche. Like, I'm burnt out on detailing. I want to start something else. And he's like, dude, but there's probably, everything, by this time, I think it was 2014. Yeah. He's like, dude, you've been doing it, 6 years. You probably know everything there is to know about detailing, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's what I hate about it. Like, I know everything. It's not a challenge anymore, And he's like, well, just start talking about what you're doing every day. He goes, you're already doing it. Just talk about it. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty easy. Then I don't have to fake it till I make it. I don't have to, make up stuff. I can just talk about what's right in front of me. That'd be pretty easy. So I went home and researched like autodetailingpodcast.com because I'm not good with names, right? I can't come up with the maxed out man podcast. Keep it very simple. I'm Jimbo's Auto Detailing. I'm very Jimbo's Auto Detailing and the Auto Detailing podcast. Like it's very simple, right? And it was available.
Dude, but SEO, man, that's the perfect. First of all, it's cool that it was available, but it's also just that's SEO, right? Like, what am I looking for? I'm looking for an auto detailing podcast.
And that's what I thought, right? And that's what happened. I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe autodetailingpodcast.com is available for like $12 a year or whatever. And so I bought it, and then I started literally recording voice memos on my phone of like, this is what I'm doing today. This is the issues that came up. This is how I do 12 cars in a day. This is, a customer complained that I broke their air vent, and this is how I handled it. I think I'm dealing with heat stroke, and so this is how I, take a break every day is in the customer's car with the AC on. Like, here's how I don't have coffee breath, right? Like, make sure you don't have coffee breath when you go to a customer's door, and you just stopped at Starbucks on the way in. And, just like every little thing about my day I would talk about. And then I was like, well, no one knows me because I'm just like Jimbo from Seal Beach, right? Like outside of Seal Beach, no one knows me, right? And so I started to interview other people that I thought people would know. And then I did the social climb, in that regard. And so, interviewed everyone and anyone that would come on the podcast, which, as you alluded to, in 2014, 2015, people are like, what's a podcast? Who are you? What do you want to do? Like, I don't know. And I got a lot of no's, but I got a lot of yeses and a lot of people taking a chance on it. On this little thing called the Auto Detailing Podcast.
Yeah, and we were able to we networked on that because we were at that time I launched Detailer's Helper, which is this detailing tool belt. One of my other businesses, I launched that early 2014, and I think probably by 2015 I had already built up a pretty good library on YouTube of my niche, which is I wasn't talking about detailing, I was talking about business and marketing concepts under a detailing umbrella. And I think that's when you and I started to align. And like most of the podcasts that you and I have done have just been talking about the detailing business, right? Like that in particular. And so then we were able to connect and you capitalized on my information, I capitalized on your information, and we got to be good friends. So
yeah, totally. I think we met at SEMA 2014, might have been 15.
Probably
for the first time in person, did podcast episodes back then. And that was a whole journey of trying to figure out, how to record a podcast, out and about, and the mistakes that came along.
Yeah, because we did one upstairs. If you remember, we recorded upstairs at SEMA.
I do. I remember.
Right in between Central Hall, right outside of Central Hall. If you've never been to SEMA, this is not going to make any sense to you. But essentially, we were at a huge trade show. We went upstairs and found a little corner. You had your little digital recorder. We recorded on that, and there you go.
Yep. So it's interesting to see how far it's come over the past 10 years and how popular it's gotten and the tools that are available now. But I started that podcast, and that opened up my world. I thought that was going to be a huge revenue generator for me. And it never ended up being that. But what it did end up being is it gave me a ton of access. So I started getting incredible access behind the scenes to a bunch of different other businesses. And that was one thing I started to really love about mobile detailing. And I still miss to this day. And I consider it my, 6 or 8 years of education in college was, and no one talks about this with mobile detailing. And I think it's such an underrated feature that you get with mobile detailing or detailing in general, is that you meet people from all walks of life. I did multi-millionaire cars. I did boats for super rich people. I did cars for super poor people. I did cars in the ghetto. I did cars in private garages. And you just meet all these different people from all walks of life. And I'm a very curious person. So I ask most of the time very inappropriate questions, like, hi, nice to meet you. What do you do for a living? Like, which is funny that would become a cool TikTok thing, because I feel like that's what I did my whole life. I mean, I could tell you a story about,
that's what that one TikTok guy does, right? He just goes up and asks people in supercars and that, what, and like, dude, you talk about inappropriate questions. He's like, what do you do for a living? How much money is in your bank account right now? Like all that kind of stuff is
totally,
it's crazy. But tell me a story.
Yeah. So I was a sophomore or a junior in high school. And, this is, I mentioned kind of driving in middle school and having this revelation about clean cars and dirty cars, high-end cars and low-end cars. And so I was always analyzing everything. And I was a sophomore or junior in high school, went to a party because that's what everyone was doing then, trying to find a party. And we went to this girls' party in a more affluent section of Seal Beach. So I grew up in kind of what we refer to as Old Town, which is kind of it wouldn't be ghetto, but it's like the older part of town. And then there's this other part called Rossmore, which was a development, I think, built in like the 70s, bigger lots, high-end homes, and more affluent people. Anyway, so we went to a party in this more affluent area, and her parents were there, which was total, a total cock block, right? As a sophomore or junior in high school, right? Like, oh, your parents are here. This sucks. But I always kind of liked it because when we went to nice houses, it was like, holy shit, what do your parents do? Everyone's like, keg stand. And I'm like, but what do your parents do? So I was kind of the weird guy there. And like, this house is amazing, like what cars are in the garage? And so we were there and her parents were there. And this would have been 2004-ish, 2003, 2004. And I remember she had like a stepdad, and he was a total weirdo. But he was wearing these like linen pants, right? Because I think they were having like a family barbecue and we thought it was a party and got wrong information. So we end up like thinking we're going to party and we're at this family barbecue, which is how information traveled back then, especially in high school. But anyway, this guy is there and I'm like, man, we're in the affluent part of town. This guy's got like a house that is just bitching. It's dialed in. It's huge. They got a pool, landscaping's on point, Mercedes in the driveway. I'm like, wow, like this is the goal, And then I see this dude and he's wearing like these, linen pants. And in the pocket of his linen pants is, and remember the time frame, this is like 2003, 2004, was pre-iPhones, right? Pre all that. And in his pocket, it looks like he has a screen and it's just like lit up. And do you remember like big screen TVs and home entertainment systems back then? You had to have like a receiver and you had all these remotes, and then your receiver would have one remote or something like that, right? And
right.
So this guy had something going on in his pants, right? Maybe multiple things, who knows? But this thing lit up. and I'm like, dude, what is that in your pants? Like speaking of inappropriate questions, right? Like, what is that? But it was just like, imagine a dimly lit backyard. This guy's wearing like light, linen pants. And there's just like this huge screen in his pants, And I'm just like, what the hell is that? And he pulls it out and he's like, this controls my whole house. And I was just like, what? Like, you control your whole house from that? now we say, Alexa, turn the lights on, and they turn on.
Wow.
But in 2003, 2004, that was like, are you part of the cartel? Like, what is going on here, And so I'm like, dude, my next question was like, dude, what do you do for a living? Which is so funny that's like, it always trips me out that that's like a popular TikTok thing. Cause I'm like, if I had any smarts at all, I would have started doing that. Cause I already did it my whole life. I asked what people did for a living, right? I just never recorded
right.
it.
You just needed to record it. You just needed to record it at that time, right?
I'm just not smart enough to see the market in that way, right? So, but I'm like, dude, what do you do for a living? And this guy was like a total douchebag. And he's like, hey, man, like, I own multiple businesses. And he said it just like that, like, I own multiple businesses. And I'm like, well, like what? And he's like, I just own multiple businesses. And I was like, interesting. But that moment in high school always stuck with me. And then I chalked that up on my little mental notepad of things I'm going to do. I'm going to own a business. And now I'm going to own multiple businesses, because I want to be like this guy.
Right.
And if that's what this guy does, that's what I'm doing. And so that always stuck with me too, of like, I'm going to own multiple businesses. Only less douchey, and I don't wear linen pants, right? Like, that's kind of weird. And so, and I don't hang out at high school parties. Not yet. And so I always kept those things with me. So when I started detailing, and, my kind of end goal was maybe I'll own a car wash one day. That'd be really cool. But I also had these other, ideas of things that I could do: transportation company, a limo company, an odor removal business. And the next thing on my plate was a podcast. So I did that. And then it gave me access to even more people. It was just in the industry that I had. So I had all this experience of clients that I had met and the different businesses they had, from trucking to barbecue. This guy manufactured barbecues and was super successful, and also a distributor of barbecues. And I saw, he was my client for like 6 or 8 years, and I saw him progress in his business and got like a front row seat to that. I did trust fund babies' cars, and they had private limos and Sprinter vans and multiple houses, and would buy houses. And then I'm like, oh, but you can't move in for 30 days, right? And they're like, no, I just transfer the money and we get the keys later this afternoon. I'm like, what? Like, that's, it's just like a whole different world all day long, And so, the podcast was like my next business, and that gave me more access to this niche industry of detailing, met really cool people, got access to, behind the scenes things. And that opened up a whole new world. And at the same time, content creation was kind of new. Content creator was kind of new. Then I started interviewing YouTubers and started dabbling into YouTube in like 2018, I think it was. And there's been a whole host. I've really tried to be extremely opportunistic and maximize relationships and maximize opportunities when they arise to, my main thing is to increase revenue and make more money. Make more money working with people that I like working with.
And many different types of revenue, right?
And as many as possible, because I never want to go back to when I first started detailing and I had one single source of revenue that was completely dependent upon me actually physically working and the weather being good. I told myself I'm never going back to that. Mm-hmm. So because there's ebbs and flows to everything, and life is a roller coaster, and nothing is consistent, And so when one thing's hitting, sometimes the other thing's not.
Well, it's really funny out here because I live in Montana, and it's you always hear farm and ranch, right? So farm and ranch, if you don't know, are two different sides of the same coin. So almost all people that do farming also do ranching, which means they raise cattle, sheep, pigs, whatever livestock they happen to be, because the way that these commodity markets work is like when wheat is really down, for some reason, the cattle market, and I don't know the economics, farm economics. I grew up in a farm family, but a farm and ranch family. But then the other commodity like cattle, pork prices, all of those are up. So they will almost always continually have a decent year, because when one's down, the other's up. So then they just move their concentration to that particular thing.
Wow, I never knew that. That's really interesting, because you're trying to, what I've come to realize now later in life too, as responsibilities have gotten bigger, bills have gotten bigger, income has gone up, but you really want to try, nothing is consistent, but man, those highs are high, but those lows are low, and we've had multiple conversations, and so I think what I've tried to do, not only did I always want to own multiple businesses, but you try to like smooth out those lows, but then I sometimes I think, man, you don't know how high a high is until you've dealt with the lows to the lows either. And that is the entrepreneurial roller coaster. And unfortunately or fortunately, the thought and the idea that I'm still grappling with is I can't physically or mentally do anything else other than run my own businesses. And I struggle with that.
Right.
And I think about, man, life would be, life potentially would be a lot easier and simpler if I just had a job. And I've been offered jobs,
Right.
And I just like, I just cannot do it. And I wish that sometimes I wish I could because it would just save so much stress. But then I'm like, but then you don't get the highest of the high. You get a very in the middle, and I'm just not an in the middle guy, so.
Yeah, and there's not anything necessarily wrong with that, with somebody that's employed and all that, and maybe you're looking at a side gig or something, and you can be entrepreneurial within as even an employee. But those of us like you and I, we and I'm 15, 16 years older than you, so I'm almost completely unemployable at this point. But I'm now at a point in my career where people will hire me as a consultant to come help them run their businesses. And I know that you're in that same position. So being a content creator, like piggybacked you into people reaching, and I want to know whether or not this was you reaching out to them or they just randomly reached out to you, but you've actually done consulting for content creation for major companies. But you still work for yourself. They tell you what they want. You still do it at your own time. You tell them how they need to do it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And they reached out to me. So I was, I started doing the YouTube thing, and I was interviewing YouTubers and talking about their kind of journey and how they got into it and how they're successful with it. And the thing that, fascinated me or intrigued me about YouTube was the monetization of YouTube. And so podcasting doesn't yet have that kind of monetization that you can with YouTube. And the numbers are a lot smaller traditionally with podcasts, at least niche podcasts, right? And so, but what I was figuring out with these YouTubers is they were making, good money, and then they had an Amazon affiliate account. And, one of the first YouTubers that was really successful that I became really close friends with was Darren Priest with Auto Fetish, who hasn't really, has kind of dropped off, but at the time he was making really good money. But he was a prime example of someone who was in his 50s, who had mobile detailed for like 35 years, and it showed, and he was tired of it. But he also did this content creation thing on the side that was replacing his detailing income and was kind of his like retirement plan, and was building up a website and affiliate marketing and all that. And so, but then I interviewed Scott Bly with Dallas Paint Correction, who also doesn't really put out any content anymore. But I had him over at my house one time. We did a podcast, and I was explaining to him, like, man, I really want to take a deeper dive into YouTube. But I just don't know, like I'm trying to do like these how-to videos, and they're just not really resonating. I'm not really getting views, because on YouTube, it's all about the views. It's not about subscribers are just a vanity metric. It's really about the monthly views, for the ad revenue and all that. And so Scott said to me, you got to be controversial on YouTube. That's what works. You got to be controversial. But I'm not a controversial guy. So I struggled with that, right? Like, man, like I want to do good on YouTube. I want to have a successful channel. I want the money, but I'm not controversial. And if that's what it takes, I got to figure out a way to do it in my style. And so then that, in conjunction with what I'd learned through the years with SEO, accidentally, autodetailingpodcast.com was simple and works great for SEO, but it was kind of just like, I don't know, let's see if Auto Detailing Podcast is available. It was I would like to think it was more thought out than it actually was. And so I had this thought of like, okay, what is a brand? If I'm going to do YouTube, let's find a brand that everyone knows about, but no one's talking about. Like, that would be the ultimate, right? And so if I could find a brand that everyone knows, so it'll do really good in SEO, it's everywhere, but no one's talking about them, that would be my next blue ocean. And I'll just talk about that brand, you know? And then if that brand is a big legacy brand, chances are they have money, right? Because these startup brands, you know, they want to advertise for one video, and then you tell them it's $500 or $1,000. And like, can you do it for free? Can you do it for affiliate income? Can you do it for $100? Can you do it? It's like, and then you do a one-off, and then you never hear from them again, you know? So I'm like, I need a legacy brand that has some marketing spend that will throw money at me. And if no one's talking about them, I'll get on their radar really fast. And so I had heard, I think through Darren, actually, a long time ago, I like went through the Rolodex of my brain. And I'm like, I thought Darren talked about turtle wax spray wax being really good. And then I was like, whoa, turtle wax is a brand. Everyone has a turtle wax story. Everyone. It's insane how everyone has a turtle wax story. But then when I looked on YouTube, I'm like, no one's talking about them. And in fact, the people that do talk about them talk in a really negative connotation, right? I'm like, if I talk positively about them, they're also a global brand. Like, it hit all my checks, right? And so, and at the same time, I was like, what if I was talking to my wife, and she's really into makeup, and I'm like, man, I'm really trying to do this YouTube thing and blah, blah, blah. Do you have any ideas for me? And she's really the brains behind our family. And she goes, oh, you know what? They do a lot. And she's like, it's like midnight. I've been pondering this question for weeks, you know, and like, I'm just finally talking to her about it. And, you know, she's like scrolling Instagram on her phone, and she's like, oh, you know what people do in the makeup industry is they do like a lot of cheap versus expensive. That might be kind of cool, you know, for a car detailing. Like, just riffed it off, right? And I had like, it's like so frustrating, you know? And then I had this like huge epiphany at midnight one night of like, that is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. Are you kidding me? And she's like, what? And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Right. And so that's what I did. And then it kind of fit with the other thoughts that I had of like, no one's talking about turtle wax, and they're a global brand and everyone knows them. And that'll probably work really good for SEO. And, you know, they probably have money, and they'd probably, if I got on their radar and talked good about them, they'd probably call. Right. Like, that seems pretty reasonable. Yeah. And so I went out and I was like, I'm going to do a cheap versus expensive. So the turtle wax ice spray wax was the first turtle wax video I ever did. I think it was like $5 or $6 or something like that for that bottle. And then I compared it. I was like, well, I don't know, I'll just pick another expensive spray wax and I'll do a cheap versus expensive video. And it was like a Griot's Garage. They're like yellow spray wax. And I just did a video. And in the video, and I'm not ghetto, but I'm simple in my content, right? I don't like to do a lot of editing. They're not fancy. I'm just very simple. And so I shoot it and I post it, you know, not a lot of editing, and I let the camera roll. Yeah. And in that video, the turtle wax did way better than the Griot's Garage, like way better. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if all this stuff that people have talked crap on for turtle wax isn't true? Like, that would be huge, you know? And I posted that video. It did really well. And I was like, okay, cool. I found a little niche, cheap versus expensive. This is a framework I could work within. This is easy to create content around. Just find an expensive product and find a cheap product. And so I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And sure enough, Turtle Wax called and they're like, Jimbo, we love your content. I was like, I bet you do. But I was also telling the truth, right?
Right. Yeah.
I bet you do. Right. But most importantly is that their product actually was a ton better than what people gave them credit for. And I'll have to backtrack a little bit, because I also, in that cheap versus expensive, I figured I had to develop a test to like test these products too. I couldn't just like apply it and be like, this one smells good and okay, looks good, that's good to go. So I created the torture test. And then I also thought, man, if I create my own test, no one's going to beat me at my own test, right? So I created my own torture test and did like shock value. And that was my way of being controversial, talking about cheap versus expensive products, spraying wheel cleaners and things that you would never put on, you know, your car on to test the claims of these products. And that was controversial enough to really get some views, really get brands talking. and it really resonated with viewers. And yeah, brands started to call and said, hey, we want your help. This is the things we're trying to do. This is where we want to go. Can you help us get there? Can we send you products and you torture test them and don't post it so we can know where our vulnerabilities are? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like you would pay me to do that. Mm-hmm. And they're like, absolutely. And I'm like, absolutely, I'll do that. Right. And so that's where YouTube still to this day, I think, is single-handedly the best platform, the best social platform to get brands to call you and say, hey, we want you.
Yeah, because it's not temporal, right? Like it lives forever on YouTube. Mm-hmm. That's what they always talk about with YouTube. It's like you do a video and you're still getting views on videos you made 7 or 8 years ago, I'm sure. And that's kind of how, granted with short form content and all that, there's kind of an immediacy, but when you're doing these medium form, longer form content, then that stuff just sits out there forever. And for whatever reason, it may not do great out front, but then somebody shares it somewhere and then it pops up again. So then, or the brands, if they're smart, they've got a social media manager person that's going out and looking for hashtags and keywords and then they'll find you.
Yep. But even with all this short form so since then, on the podcast, I was talking a lot about like people growing their Instagram followings. And then I realized I wasn't taking my own advice. So I grew my Instagram following to 100,000 followers organically over the course of a year, or right about 100. And, I still have found a video that in my book would underperform, a long format video on YouTube that underperforms, still does better than a short form piece of content that really performs by the numbers. And so I've, more recently been like, okay, I need to take YouTube a little bit more serious. I got really burnt out on YouTube for a while. But in, the past couple weeks, months or so, I've really tried to put more emphasis and focus on that. Because the reach is just so good, regardless of what the views say, so.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you look at just this whole journey, I mean, you're like me, where your journey is, not convoluted, but it's lengthy, right?
Pretty much.
You've had this kind of over time, and you're still a young dude for the most part. And, it's, but I think the net of it is, if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, then there are ways and opportunities to take those things that you notice, that you love, that you're interested in, and turn those into ways to make revenue. And then what, a lot of what you talk about is like, I was looking to do this. Some of that was by necessity, because we've had a lot of those, hey, how many weeks of cash do you have left in your bank account?
Like -3.
You and I have. Yeah. It's like, yeah, well, you mean I ran out, a month ago? Yeah, that's what it is. I gotta generate some cash. Yeah. So sometimes the necessity of having to come up with these ideas, but every little step that you've done has been deliberate. And part of the thing with being an entrepreneur versus being a small business owner, for example, is that you do these things, you fail a lot, not, we're just doing the highlight reel, right? Like you're doing all these things that have worked successfully.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But, there's 5 or 6 or 10 or 50 things in between that, did real well. And I know you've gone back and forth to detailing, here and there, because it's, it's a source of cash. And I've done, I have multiple brands and have done different things too. And so, but like, what's the net of what you would give people as far as advice for starting and maintaining kind of an entrepreneurial journey?
So there's,
because in my mind, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You could finish the thought. Sorry.
Oh, I was just, in my mind, it's there, that stick-to-itiveness and, kind of try and shotgun approach or spaghetti on the wall, whatever you want to call it, seems to work.
Totally. And I will, you're 100% right in saying that this has been the highlight reel, because I am convinced that there's been more failures than successes. It's just, you have to make sure that the successes are big enough to outweigh the failures. So that's been my focus of like, I need to make sure that the wins are big wins, because the losses are big losses. And so, but there's, when you ask that question, there's 2 things that come to mind. One that I held on to, I'm a big quotes guy. My family makes fun of me because they call them bumper stickers, but I'm big on quotes. And there's two quotes. One I held on to dearly when I was an infant entrepreneur. And then there's one that I hold on to dearly within the past year, but I still hold on to it. So the one that I held on to early on is that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't want to work. And that to me was that I felt like everyone was talented around me. My wife coming up with that idea just off a whim, like, you should do cheap versus expensive. That might be kind of cool. That may work. Like, what? Like, how much effort I put into this, and like never would have in a million years come to that. And you just like came to that. And, my wife's family is very artistic. My wife is a great drawer. Her brother is a phenomenal painter, was going into architecture school and like did these just elaborate, beautiful architecture drawings. My sisters are just brilliant in school. They all have their degrees, and my older sister with an advanced degree even. And just everywhere I looked, it seemed like, I'm not handy. I don't know anything about an engine. I couldn't, I couldn't build anything. It confuses me why there's, a domain is different than hosting. It confuses me that 2x4s aren't actually 2x4. I'm very confused with a lot of things in life. I'm confused most of my day. And so, I always had this outlook of like, man, there's very talented. I don't play any instruments. I can't play instruments. I don't, music isn't that exciting to me. There's a whole host of negatives that I go into, but there's one thing that I always held on to was that I would outwork anyone, and I would try my absolute best. And so that quote really resonated with me of like, I'm not the best detailer in the world. I like hands down, I'm not even top 10,000. I'm a very mediocre detailer. You know what I mean? And so, so that was my first quote, is that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't want to work. Because what I figured, and, that whole idea of like starving artist, of like, there's really, really talented people. And there was really, really talented people in my world right in front of me. And I realized that their talent was actually a hindrance because they relied on it too much of like, well, I'm good at that. Like I could just do it, but they never worked hard for it. And so that was the one that got me through a lot of painful lessons. And the quote, I don't know if it's a quote or more of a mindset now, but now is like, if you don't give up, no one's going to beat you, and it's like, this isn't working now, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work. Like the only way you're going to fail is if you quit. So like, don't quit, dumbass. Usually that's my internal dialogue, like don't quit.
Don't
like
dumbass.
Don't have a little opposition and then you just fold the deck of cards. Like keep going. If you do this forever, who's going to beat you? And that really served me well when like podcasting started getting popular. And though I have good SEO with it and 700 and something episodes, it was like I did have that fear of like, man, what if a detailing podcast comes along and it's better than mine, right? Like that would kind of suck. I've put a lot of effort into this. And then my next thought was like, yeah, but these people quit. And luckily a couple early people did quit, like started a detailing podcast and then quit. And so that was a little bit of motivation of like, see, if you don't quit, you can't fail. So that's kind of one I hang on to now.
Yeah, 100%.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap this thing up. Sometimes these podcasts are more like Q&A and very specific. I think though, one of the goals of this podcast and just everything I'm doing is to kind of inspire other men to take chances and to, have possibilities. And not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, but I've always, I love you as a friend, obviously, but I love your story. And, you and I learn a lot from you, even as a guy that's younger than me. And I know, hopefully you learned some stuff from me, but I think
absolutely
this life story, entrepreneurial journey is something that really resonates with people. So I'm excited to get the feedback on it and see how it goes. But I appreciate you, man. And I, we'll have to do this again. I think to catch up, you need to do like 11 more episodes of this in order to catch up with me on the auto detailing podcast. So
We are such good friends and love
come
each
back
other.
and tell the rest of the story.
Yeah. We are such good friends and love each other so much. I'm the 24th guest on the Maxed Out Man podcast.
That's just because you wouldn't
I'm
answer my
teasing.
calls. I text you all the time, and you.
I am teasing. No, but the feeling is mutual, and
I'll go back and edit it.
Yeah, to number -24. No, but the feeling's mutual, and I'm super proud to call you a friend. And it's always great when we can see each other in person at these trade shows and have a good laugh about this industry that we find ourselves trying to constantly get out of, but only it's like quicksand, as we try to climb out, we just climb deeper.
keeps pulling us back in.
Keeps pulling us.
All right, buddy. I love you. Have a great
Love
day.
ya. All right.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.